One of the most important things in software development is culture, the culture of your team. We think about technical skills, but how you manage that team and the culture that you set is even more important. Do the developers feel like they have autonomy? They have meaningfulness in the work that they do? Do they have purpose? These are the kind of things we're going to talk about today with John Durant. Fantastic conversation on product driven. You don't want to miss. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Today, excited to be joined by John Durant, who is the founder, chief consultant, I don't know what we would call him, of Human Centric Engineering, helping engineering teams, how would you describe it, John? Solve all the weird problems that they have that are culture related, right? It's like how we do the work, how we manage the team. How would you describe this, John?
Well, I think everyone knows that everyone wants to work in a good engineering culture. Everyone wants to be part of a high-performing team that's, delivering and enjoying their work. So we know what a good culture feels like and how we want that to feel. But it's a really hard thing to talk about. So, how do you improve culture? How do you measure culture? How do you understand it? And how do you talk about it? And that's where we've developed tools, methodologies, approaches to help teams through that process.
But we all have good cultures. We tell the engineers exactly what to do. They don't ask any questions, and then they go and do it, right? Like, isn't that the culture?
I think, God, if you couldn't ask questions, if you just assumed, I think that's the worst culture. But yeah, it's that's a really important thing. It's like, well, what kind of things signify what a good culture is? And I think, asking difficult questions, challenging assumptions, challenging authority, not just accepting what you're being told, not just being there to do tasks, actually feeling like your work means something. You can see the end results. You can see how, users interact with what you produce. Those are some of the constituents of what I would call culture.
Starting to sound like a lot of the themes of the product driven book. So I'm so excited for this conversation today. And I guess maybe I woke up today and I chose violence, but didn't Agile development solve all these issues?
Well, I suppose if you look at it from a very purist, if you take it right back to the intent, I think Agile was founded on understanding what human needs are.
And then we completely screwed that up.
And then we kind of, it became like a Frankenstein. Like we created Frankenstein's monster. We created this thing that at a purist level it makes a lot of sense, but then has become almost an ideology, has become sort of corrupted in a way by different methodologies and everybody jumping on the bandwagon and being something to Agile that Agile can mean anything now but in its essence, Agile is about adaptivity,
human collaboration.
We're currently going, we're entering the IT. Well, we're already in the AI era, what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to be agile. We need to be adaptable, flexible, innovative, and sense what our world needs and then respond to it in a very agile way. But can what we see as agile frameworks sort of help us to do that, or do they hinder that process now because they've become so bureaucratic?
You know what it feels like happened instead is big companies were told they need to do Agile, and then they had a budget for it, and then people figured out how can they sell as many things as possible to these companies that have the budget for Agile.
I think you've nailed it.
Is that basically what happened?
It's probably the cynical view, but I think there's a lot of truth in that cynicism.
It's like everything in big companies or government or whatever. It's like, we got a budget for it. We're going to sell them as many things as possible. Like, I mean, AI is that way, right? Like cybersecurity, whatever the trend is, right? Like people are buying whatever that thing is.
I think you kind of we drift into it. It's not intentional. Like every bit of bureaucracy came from a really sensible idea. Came from like we've got to impose a bit of control. We've got to be organized. Every bit of bureaucracy comes from a good place with a good heart. But then it it just overlaps, and it then
Yeah.
becomes a straitjacket that we get caught up in. And we're very good at implementing new things, but we're not very good at stripping things away. Although you could argue at the moment with the Doge thing going on in the US, I mean that's what they're trying to do in a rather brutal kind of way at the moment.
Yeah. So one of my lines in the book is, putting up a lot of red tape makes a lot of sense to prevent mistakes when you're doing it, right? Like, it makes sense, but then after a while, like, everybody forgets like why we did this thing, and now we just have a lot of red tape around
Yeah.
until somebody like Doge comes around. They're like, wait a second, let's remove all the tape. Let's start over.
And I think companies need to follow that process as well, because if they don't, we're going to be bounded by the legacy weight of all of this red tape, and companies won't be able to react to the new opportunities that the
Yeah.
AI kind of era is bringing.
It's the way we've always done it, kind of curse.
Yeah. So maybe we'll see companies and legacy sort of those bounded by all that bureaucracy. A lot of them are probably going to fail. And we've seen how quickly new companies can be spun up and have incredible sort of ARR statistics and yeah, it's it's happening.
So tell us a little more about the type of consulting that you do. So like if my company called you and said, "Hey, we want to figure out what kind of culture we have, how to improve the culture," like how do you actually do that? Like how do you come in and actually figure out what we're good at, what we're bad at, what we even should be good at?
So I think the key, and this is how we approach it, is to actually get on the ground and talk to engineering teams. Culture and that kind of thing. What is it? Well, it's how you feel when you show up at work. It's how you show up at work, and it's the and you can never say what a culture is as a leader. You don't listen to what the leadership says about whether they've got a good culture or a bad culture. What matters is the subjective experience of the engineers that are doing the work. So, do you feel like you have the right tools for the job? Do you feel that you're sufficiently challenged? Do you feel that you're getting into that flow state quite regularly? Do you feel engaged with your work and it brings you a sense of meaning? Can you bring creativity to your work? Do you have space to work out how you can do things better? Those are the kind of things that matter from a cultural perspective to engineers, and you can only find out and assess what the culture is like by talking to engineers. And we do that through surveys and actual getting in the room with them and having conversations. That's the starting point, and then you've got to think, well, okay, well, where are our pain points? What is it that's preventing us from where could we improve? And we look at that in three ways. It's either through the self, through the limitations of the characteristics of the engineer or their personal sort of growth and where they are there, and those sort of self-imposed limits that they might have. Also the team and how that's structured and what the dynamics are like, how it's composed, and whether they know what they're supposed to be doing. What's the primary purpose of that team? And then at the organization level, are teams being hamstrung by bureaucracy, or is there a lack of leadership that needs to be addressed, or is there a problem connecting the work of engineers to the final outcomes? So those are the kind of things that we're looking for and we're asking questions about. And to address those kind of gaps that come up through those conversations, we sit down and have run through workshops so that teams can actually take initiatives themselves, that kind of self-advocacy and that self-determined approach, so that a team feels like it has agency over its own work and how it shows up in the company. So lots to cover there.
There's a lot there, but when I hear all that, it's a lot of the same themes that I wrote about in my book, across the whole spectrum of the book around product thinking. But the big things that always stand out to me is like its purpose, its autonomy, its ownership. It's understanding why are you doing this thing and that it matters, and that every direction you turn, you're not hit with some kind of roadblock and frustration of, be it I got to wait on somebody else or this company policy thing or these meetings or all this red tape, right? Like I can just sit down and do my job and I can just like go build cool stuff. But it seems like that is lost. Like when you go to any of these companies or their developers are like, yeah, that guy's in the corner and he's just crushing it and we leave him alone. Like, does that even exist anymore?
I think you can get silos like that come up, but generally, I think that um, engineers are good at seeing reality, right? And they're good if they're given the space, they're very good at talking about it. As long as they've got a kind of a structure and a framework, and as you were talking about with that autonomy and that purpose, it feeds into our approach where we there's a psychological theory called self-determination theory, which looks at what are the constituent components of intrinsic motivation. So what makes you motivated just naturally, and it comes down to mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So can I turn up at work and do I feel that I am improving my competency? Can I apply my technical competency to this piece of work, or is it wasted? Am I just doing easy sort of manual work that is more of a drudgery than an inspiration? So can I apply that sense of mastery at work? Do I have autonomy? Can I make some decisions? Do I know what are the boundaries in which I can make decisions? And am I constantly having to ask my line manager, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Or can the team actually take some charge over prioritization? Well, they can only do that if they've got the right kind of context and the right kind of information. So is that being supplied to the team? And whose job is it to supply that to the team? And what does the team do when it doesn't have the right kind of contextual information to be able to make a decision? Well, that's when they need to go and ask. But if they're doing that all the time, then it's not really an autonomous team, and it doesn't feel good. And purpose. Well, what is the purpose of this team? Where does it fit in terms of the whole the whole sort of software estate and the rest of the business? What's it actually? What value is the team delivering, and why? That big question. Why are we doing this? And why is this thing more important than another thing that we could be doing? So having that sense of purpose and connection. Do I feel connected? Do I feel a sense of camaraderie with my team members? Do we get along well together? Do I feel connected to the other stakeholders in the business, or are they just kind of just names that I see on a screen sometimes or at the end of an email chain? Do I feel connected to the customers? Do I get that sense? Do I get is feedback regularly pumped in from about user experience and what the actual outcomes of what we've been working on? So yeah, that sense of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And
I love those three. I think those are awesome, by the way.
yeah, and so do engineers. Yeah, so you talk about this stuff, and it can catch everything in a whole sort of engineer's world. So, and that's how we try to make it simple, by categorizing things and having hooks that we can cling to sort of talk about. Otherwise, it just comes up as complaining about something or something that isn't working very well, and you just put it. You don't have a box to put it in. So yeah.
Well, and I love all three of these, and honestly, at full scale, I feel like when we do like reviews of our employees every quarter, and we have a whole career growth framework and stuff, and I think you nailed three things that those are the right way to think about how we track our engineers and kind of grading them over time on how they're doing with these things, how they're improving at these things. I think they're great. There are three great categories. The one thing that we always stress on at full scale that is the underlying thing for us for everything is courage. And, it starts with, to me, it's the underpinning of all these things, because it takes courage from the engineers themselves to speak up, to ask questions, to try and solve these cultural issues that need to be solved, right? Versus just showing up every day and dealing with the drudgery of all of it. it also takes a lot of courage as a leadership group to figure out how to solve these problems, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as an engineer myself 20 years ago, as an engineering manager 20 years ago, I would have rather have like sat on my laptop and wrote some code than figure out how to solve this culture problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, I want to just go solve, I want to go write code and build stuff. Like, I don't want to manage people and culture problems, right? And now, 20 years later, I understand how important this is, right? I understand that we're in the business of people and talent, and I can't do everything. If my company's going to scale, I've got to delegate, I've got to train people, I've got to build other people, right? Like 20 years ago, I didn't get that quite as much. I thought I could just work more hours and solve every problem. But do you run into these exact issues when you go into a lot of organizations? Like
Oh,
they
totally.
maybe they know they have these courage problems, but they don't know how to fix them, or they don't want to fix them, or they don't have the right operational people that can lay down what the fix.
Totally, and I'm glad you brought that up because it fits. We would put that under the sort of autonomy kind of barrier where
Mm-hmm.
where we're thinking about trust. So, are you trusted by the leadership, and do you trust each other to do the right kind of job? But also with trust comes you don't get trust unless you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable. And by vulnerability, I don't mean sort of crying in front of your your colleagues. What I mean is, sharing a piece of information with them that they could use to judge you with, but trusting that they're going to judge you fairly.
Yeah.
Exposing yourself to getting something wrong, and that takes obviously courage, right? Are you going to innovate and risk, being, making a mistake and those kind of things. And I think that it's not talked about enough, and that's the kind of conversation that we want to bring. And I know of a an engineering leader. She actually measures. This is one of her measurement approaches. She'll measure how often how often subordinates will talk to people that are higher up in the organization. So how many of those conversations have you had this month? Have you had a chance to talk to the CEO? Have you had a chance to talk to the CTO? And she actually collects those statistics as a way of measuring courage and candor. Can you be honest with people outside of engineering? And if you can, that's fantastic because it means that you can tackle the really hard problems together. You can point to something that isn't working and not worry about getting blamed for it, and get supported in then sort of addressing that particular problem. So absolutely, I think it's something that it's something that actually then feeds into the person's self-esteem. When you've taken a risk and it's kind of not backfired on you, and you've gone somewhere, it improves your own sense of self-esteem, well-being, and role. And I think that the operating system of many companies at the moment is fear. I mean, there's been a lot of layoffs. There's
Yeah.
a lot of social, political, technical changes going on at the moment. People are worried about about job displacement and AI taking over their roles, all of that kind of thing. So the predominant thing at the moment, I think, is fear, and that's terrible. It's limiting, and you'll never expose the reality of a situation when fear is prevailing. So the only way to get around that is courage.
I love it. And courage is something we talk a lot about, and it's a theme in the product driven book, and in a lot of different places. I talk about it a lot. The I guess my next question for you is: you go into these companies, you help them figure out, okay, where are you good at mastery, autonomy, purpose, maybe courage. How do you help them create this change? What does that culture change process look like? And is it one meeting and everybody creates a couple OKRs on it and it's all done? Or is this like a month-long process? Like, what is the reality here? I'm sure it's not one day and a couple OKRs.
Well, we've learned initially I think we were too optimistic in terms of providing recommendations, and we would provide far too much that could be handled. And we've realized
It's
that
got to
what
be
people actually,
bite-sized.
yeah, people actually need practical bite-sized initiatives. And it needs not to come from us. We can be facilitators and guides in that process. It needs to come from the engineers and leaders. They know their environments better. So we kind of do a working backwards approach. We sort of look at, we might look at an area where that needs to be improved. For example, it might be an innovation or creativity. Engineers might be craving for more time to do sort of experimental stuff. So what we'll do is we'll sit down with the team and we'll look at what's the ideal situation, where do they want to be, what is it at the moment that's blocking that, and we'll look at that from the perspective of the person, the team, and the organization. And then, okay, what kind of strategies might help to overcome those blocks? And the problem is then we'll have like so many possibilities, and then we need to narrow that down. So that's kind of that's divergent thinking in terms of exploring what the problems are and what the potential solutions are. And then we need to be divergent and actually get down to practical levels. So out of that, what is actually feasible in a certain time frame, and then narrow it down even further to one or two things. What are we actually going to commit to doing, and how are we going to measure whether that's been effective? And that's really got to be driven by the people in the team that are going to be implementing certain changes or working through certain problems.
And so do you tell them like, hey, let's fix this one thing? Or like, how do you project that change out? Is it really like, hey, this month let's try and do this one thing better? Like we change how we do agile meetings or whatever, right? Like whatever the thing is, like, and then the next month it's a different thing. Like how do you?
One or two small things that can realistically be done in a measurable time frame, so that you can put some tight feedback loops around it and assess, okay, has this worked? Has this got us into a better place, and are we going to do more of it? Or
you got to create a new habit, and you got to get everybody used to that habit before you add yet another habit.
Totally. I love that you brought the word habit up. There's an author, Charles Duhigg, who wrote about organizational habits years and years ago, and then a lot of the other books about habits kind of copied him and then sort of built on that. But that's it exactly. Culture is habit, right? It's kind of like what you do when you show up and what you're used to doing, and realizing that. And we're so bad at changing habits, whether it's with our own kind of fitness, whether our own sort of scrolling, eating the wrong foods, or whatever we do. It's so hard to change because our habits become our identity. So we'll protect. We'll really want to project. We'll defend our identity because that's us. So it's really, really hard to change. And the team will resist changes as well, which is why you can only really do one or two sort of small things at a time with the consensus of the people that are actually going to be involved. You can't impose this stuff. It won't work. People will resist it. It's got to come from the team.
Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and I think this is the kind of topic that people don't talk enough about. Like everybody wants to talk about some tech stack or how you go from being a senior developer to an engineering manager and all these other topics that are more career advancement and more mastery related, right? But culture from an engineering leadership perspective is a huge, huge topic and problem. So I really, really appreciate having you on the podcast today. Like this was an exciting conversation for me, and a lot of this echoes different topics in my book. But so to round this out though, I think I'd love to hear from you. Is there one or two kind of key things that you see over and over when you meet with these teams and they have different culture problems? Are there one or two specific things that seem to be the main things that you just see over and over?
I think one of the main things is that from engineers' perspective, they're not understood. Leadership doesn't understand them. They feel that they're not understood. They can't be heard. So when we show up, it's almost like therapy. It's like... it's like they haven't had the space to be honest So a third party coming in where it's kind of confidential and you can actually speak truthfully is quite liberating for people, because otherwise that conversation doesn't get out. So we make sure that all that stuff is anonymized before it goes up to leadership.
Okay.
But at least it gets heard. And then I guess, and I guess it's the other thing is that I think that there can often be apathy in that people don't feel that they can actually do anything to change their circumstances. They feel like this is how it is. Yeah. And I think that's just so wrong. I think that culture is kind of contagious, right? If you show up in a bad mood, then the rest of your team's going to be in a bad mood, and vice versa. So it's so reflective, it's reciprocal, and it's down to us. We blame the system, but we are part of the system. And there's so much that we can do in our own behaviors, in our own relationships, that actually improves our own conditions, that will enable us to do better work and have more fun while we're doing it.
And you're saying we should have hope. We can change it.
Totally,
we can do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just call John.
It's important. I think hope is important. It's not just wishful thinking. It's actually, it gives people meaning. It gives people purpose. It gives people a reason to do things. And we lose connection to that. We just become cogs in a machine unless we kind of say, no, we must have meaningful work. If we feel like our work isn't meaningful, then what can we do to change our attitude towards that so that it does mean something to us? And I think, the power lies within engineers themselves more than they actually realize.
So if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, I really get this, I really want to figure out how to improve our culture. I know you're writing a book, and I don't know when your book will be out, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But are there other resources that you would point people to? Or are there things you would say, hey, this, if you want to do this, here's where to start?
Yeah, for sure. We've open sourced our sort of culture surveys and our leadership surveys. So they're on GitHub. So you can, and if you don't like them, you can do a PR, that's how it can improve. So they are open sourced, or we can run them for you. So there's that approach, and also we're quite active on LinkedIn, sort of sharing ideas there, and we're kind of running a monthly theme thing. As we're writing the book, we're going to be writing one theme a month, so we're giving ourselves a 12-month window to do this in, and we're kind of sharing that in public as well. So this month the topic is creativity, under the sort of mastery banner. Next month it's going to be agency, and that's going to be under the autonomy banner. So, join us on this kind of cycle of topics that we're exploring. And if people are passionate about this kind of stuff and have got their own kind of stories to share, we'd love to jump on a call and have a chat and hear those, because we really want to make it sort of real world, practical sort of based.
All right. Well, you guys heard it. There is hope. There is hope. If you're in a big corporation that is not doing all these things the right way, there's hope. Once again, this was John Durant from Human Centric Engineering. We'll put a link in the show notes to his company's website. John, thank you so much for doing this today.
Been a pleasure, Matt. Thank you.
Before we wrap up today's episode, we have a special resource for you if you're looking to elevate your development team to have more of a product-driven mindset. I have a fantastic free ebook about turning your code-first team into a product-first team. Please go to fullscaleteam.com/product-first-teams to download this free ebook. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Product Driven, and we'll see you in the next episode.